Our recent studies in world religions class have brought us into contact with some very powerful and relevant themes. We have been exploring the ordeal and trauma that many Native American people have endured due to the residential schools experience, as well as the related work of generational healing. In this podcast, I'd like to invite us to explore three issues. First, how does a wound or trauma experienced by a previous generation impact later generations? Second, what responsibility do we have collectively to help make whole people like Native Americans and other groups that have suffered historical injustices? And third, what wisdom can we apply to our own experience as we study how Native people have sought to uncover the truth about what happened to their ancestors, and they try to bring about healing? I want to preface these reflections by saying that I realize that we are on very holy ground here, and we are approaching issues that reside in the deepest recesses of the human heart. I invite you in your conversation to unpack these as much as is comfortable for you. First, we explore how trauma experienced by previous generations can impact later ones. It is said that the story of whom you are began long before you were born. We carry our ancestors in our DNA. They made choices and endured experiences that set them and us on a certain trajectory. Some of those paths were auspicious. They created the opportunity for descendants to live a different kind of life. Indeed, our ancestors did some brave and wise things that allowed us to live under very good conditions. But things also happened to them, or they might have made choices that brought about unhappy outcomes. Perhaps there was addiction, or physical abuse, or a tragic accident, or the death of a parent when a child was young, or the death of a child. These tragedies echo through the generations. In the case of the Native American peoples we have studied, most children from the mid-19th century through the 1960s were forcibly removed from their homes and families and sent to residential schools, many of them run by religious institutions, including the Catholic Church. The children were not allowed to speak their language, practice their traditional spirituality, dress in their native clothes. And this is nothing compared to the trauma of being separated from their parents. Thousands of children died and were buried in unmarked graves on site at these horrific schools. Traumas like these that our ancestors experience change the trajectory and introduce dysfunctions into families that future generations will inherit. For example, Native Americans now have reported a sense of loss of identity, low self-esteem, a low sense of safety, difficulty forming healthy relationships, loss of parental power, destruction of healthy family systems, loss of sense of community, tradition, and language, all of which are deep parts of one's family story and identity. Native American peoples also suffer high rates of suicide. Again, when things like this happen to a family, it can introduce dysfunctional ways of thinking and being in the world that are passed on from generation to generation. Understandably, later generations are not aware of the dysfunction because that's all they know. They develop an accepting attitude. For example, it is accepted that the family lives with alcoholism, or rage and anger issues, or a history of stormy parent-child relationships, sibling estrangement, patterns of low self-esteem, or perhaps unresolved psychiatric issues, and a general minimization of these issues. That is, we tend to tell ourselves, oh, it's not that bad. Unless one becomes conscious of what is happening and takes steps to uncover the truth, name the original wound or wounds, and do healing work, the pain will be transmitted to the next generation. Second, a reality of being an American is that our country has treated some of its people atrociously. Our ancestors, and when I say that, I mean Americans who came before us, not necessarily our blood ancestors, made choices that caused grievous wounds to people. In addition to the example of the multiple trauma suffered by Native Americans, we also have the legacy of slavery and segregation, World War II Japanese internment, and the unhealed wound of the Vietnam War, and the 58,000 young men whose lives were cut short by that, and the hundreds of thousands more who lived out their lives with physical and emotional scars from that tragic experience. The American Civil War remains an unhealed wound on the American soul, with symbols of that conflict still able to stir deep passions, including violence. We are not guilty of causing these wounds. We are not to blame. But I would like to invite us to ask what responsibility we bear for seeing that those who suffer the legacy of these traumas are helped and made whole as much as is possible. Is it morally acceptable for us to wash our hands of this and say, "It's too bad that happened generations ago, but it has nothing to do with me. I'm not responsible"? Or do we collectively have an obligation to address this, to seek to discover the truth of what happened, to apologize for wrongs that were done, and work to make others whole? Finally, what wisdom might we take from our reflections on this broader topic of generational healing? Native American people say that when we address generational wounds, it impacts 7 generations in both directions. We can imagine how our facing these issues will set a new course for ourselves and those that come after us. The choice to become conscious and heal will also be healing for those who came before us. I can imagine them all standing with us as we do this work, saying, "We didn't know how, and we didn't have the resources, but you can do it. Let's heal together." This work is hard. It might feel like disloyalty to your family. It will feel as if there are 5 generations pushing back against your effort to become conscious and change. Because after all, this is the way we've always been, the way we've always done it. But if we can summon the courage and get the emotional and spiritual support we need, life can be transformed. When we become aware of generational issues, we can begin the journey to healing. Here are 4 ideas that might help serve our generational healing work. Number 1, when we wake up to the destructive patterns, we say, "This stops with me. I will not pass this on." We can now make a choice as to whether we will collude with the old dynamic or break it and set a new trajectory. Number 2, when we see others engaged in the dynamic, we can detach and resist the very strong temptation to take part. Number 3, we learn to listen to the deeper voice of truth within and ignore those voices within that want us to continue with the dysfunction. Number 4, we allow ourselves to feel the hurt and disappointment over the damage done and what has been lost. This involves uncovering as much as possible the truth about what happened. When we do this, we experience the healing power that comes with the truth simply being told. And number 5, we recognize that there are new possibilities. If this undertaking is to be successful for us personally and also collectively as a nation, as a people, it will require commitment, a willingness to examine ourselves and our families lovingly and honestly, professional support, and our cooperation with God's healing grace. Doing our part to heal generational trauma is a gift we can give both to our ancestors and to those who will come after us. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to reading your responses. God bless.